Captain Jake Morrison tapped his fingers against the control panel of his fighter craft as he completed another routine patrol through the Andari Nebula. The view outside was beautiful, with swirling clouds of purple and blue gas stretching for millions of miles. But Jake had seen it all before. 5 years in the United Earth Defense Force had taught him that space was mostly empty and boring, with brief moments of terror thrown in to keep things interesting. His radio crackled to life. "Captain Morrison, this is Base Command. You have an incoming message. Priority level diplomatic." Jake frowned. Diplomatic messages were not something a fighter pilot usually received. "Go ahead and send it through." What appeared on his screen made him blink in confusion. A holographic invitation materialized in front of him, written in flowing script that looked like it had been designed by someone with too much time and too much gold paint. The text was in perfect English, which was strange enough, but the content was even stranger. "You are cordially invited to attend the royal wedding of Princess Valera, daughter of His Majesty King Theron of the Zypherian Empire. Your presence is requested to honor the service you have rendered to the royal family." Jake read it 3 times. He had never heard of Princess Valera. He barely knew anything about the Zypherian Empire except that they were one of the more powerful alien civilizations in this sector of space. And he definitely had never done any service for their royal family. "Command, are you seeing this?" Jake asked. "We see it, Captain. We are just as confused as you are. Stand by while we run a background check." Jake waited, watching the invitation rotate slowly in the holographic display. It really was beautiful, covered in symbols and designs that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them. Whoever had sent this had certainly gone to a lot of trouble. After 10 minutes, the radio crackled again. This time it was Lieutenant Casey Brooks, his usual communications officer. "Jake, I think I figured it out. Remember that rescue mission 3 months ago near the Kethis system?" Jake thought back. 3 months ago, he had been returning from a failed reconnaissance mission, tired and low on fuel, when he had picked up a distress signal. A luxury passenger ship was under attack by pirates. Jake and his small squadron had responded, driving off the attackers and escorting the damaged ship to safety. "Yeah, I remember. What about it?" "One of the passengers on that ship was a Zypherian noble. We did not know it at the time because they were traveling under a false identity for security reasons. Apparently, that noble was important enough that the royal family considers your rescue a significant favor." "Important enough to invite me to a royal wedding?" "Apparently so. The diplomatic corps is very excited about this, Jake. They are saying you should definitely go. It could be a good opportunity to strengthen relations between Earth and the Zypherian Empire." Jake sighed. He had joined the military to fly fighter craft and maybe see some action, not to attend fancy parties with aliens he did not know. But orders were orders, and if the diplomatic corps thought this was important, he supposed he had to go along with it. 2 weeks later, Jake found himself on a Zypherian transport ship heading toward their homeworld. The ship was unlike anything he had ever seen before. Instead of the practical military design of Earth vessels, this ship seemed designed to impress. The walls appeared to be made of crystal that glowed with soft light, and the corridors were decorated with plants and flowing water features. The other passengers on the transport gave him curious looks. Most were Zypherian nobles dressed in elaborate robes and jewelry. Jake felt very plain in his Earth Defense Force dress uniform, but it was the best he had. When the ship finally arrived at Zyphera Prime, Jake pressed his face against the viewport like a child. The planet was incredible. Cities floated in the sky, held aloft by technology Jake could not begin to understand. Forests glowed with bioluminescent plants that created waves of color across the landscape. Oceans sparkled with something that looked like liquid diamonds. "First time seeing Zyphera Prime?" asked a voice beside him. Jake turned to find a Zypherian woman standing next to him. She was tall, like all Zypherians, with silver skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Her eyes were a deep purple color, and her hair looked like it was made of fine silver threads. "Yes," Jake admitted, "it is beautiful." "It is home," the woman said with a small smile. "I am Lady Kessa. You must be the human pilot everyone is talking about. Captain Morrison, correct? That is me. Nice to meet you, Lady Kessa. The palace has arranged quarters for you. I will show you the way once we land. The transport descended toward one of the floating cities, and Jake got his first good look at the royal palace. It was enormous, with towers that reached impossibly high and gardens that seemed to grow right out of the building itself. Landing platforms extended from the main structure like the petals of a flower. As Jake stepped off the transport, he was greeted by a delegation of palace officials. They bowed slightly, which made Jake uncomfortable. He was just a pilot, not someone who deserved all this formal attention. Captain Morrison, welcome to Zyphira Prime, said the leader of the delegation, an elderly Zyphirian with kind eyes. I am Lord Chancellor Pyrrhus. His Majesty King Theron sends his regards and thanks for your acceptance of this invitation. Your quarters have been prepared in the east wing of the palace. The wedding ceremony will take place in 3 days, which gives you time to rest and acclimate to our world. Thank you, Chancellor. I appreciate the hospitality. It is we who are grateful to you, Captain. You saved the life of someone very dear to the royal family. That is not a debt we take lightly. Jake was led through the palace, and with each step he felt more out of his depth. Everything was so grand, so elaborate. Servants bowed as he passed. Guards in ornate armor stood at attention. The walls were decorated with tapestries showing scenes from Zyphirian history that Jake could not begin to understand. His quarters turned out to be a suite of rooms larger than any apartment he had ever lived in back on Earth. There was a bedroom with a bed that seemed to float above the floor, a sitting room with furniture that adjusted itself to his body when he sat down, and a bathroom with a pool that looked more like a small lake. Jake stood at the window of his bedroom, looking out over the city. Lights were beginning to come on as the sun set, and the effect was magical. The whole city seemed to glow with soft, warm light. What have I gotten myself into? Jake muttered to himself. He had no answer, but he had a feeling the next few days were going to be very interesting. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and cultural briefings. Palace staff taught Jake the basic rules of Zyphirian etiquette, which seemed to involve a lot of bowing at specific angles and never touching someone unless they touched you first. He learned which colors were appropriate for different occasions and how to properly address members of the royal family. Casey Brooks contacted him through secure communications on the second day. How's it going, Jake? Are you surviving the fancy alien world? Barely, Jake admitted, sitting in his quarters after another exhausting etiquette lesson. Did you know there are 17 different ways to bow depending on who you are greeting? 17, Casey! I can barely remember 3. Casey laughed. Well, try not to start an intergalactic incident by bowing wrong. The diplomatic corps is watching this very closely. You are representing all of humanity there. No pressure then, Jake said dryly. The day of the wedding arrived with perfect weather. Jake dressed in his formal uniform, making sure every button and medal was perfectly placed. He had been assigned a seat near the back of the Grand Hall of Eternal Light, which was fine with him. He preferred to observe rather than be the center of attention. The hall itself took his breath away when he entered. It was massive, easily able to hold several thousand guests. The walls appeared to be made of captured starlight, glowing and shifting in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ceiling was so high that clouds seemed to form near the top. Floating platforms held musicians playing instruments Jake had never seen before, creating music that sounded like wind chimes mixed with ocean waves. Guests filled the hall, representing dozens of different alien species. Jake recognized a few from his military briefings, but most were completely unfamiliar. Everyone wore elaborate formal clothing that made Jake feel even more plain in his simple uniform. He found his assigned seat and settled in to watch. The ceremony began with a procession of nobles and officials, each announced by a herald with a voice that echoed through the massive hall. Then came the groom, Prince Carvax of the Draxian Kingdom. Jake felt an immediate dislike for the prince. Carvax was tall, even by alien standards, with dark red skin covered in decorative armor. His face had a cruel look to it, and his eyes swept over the crowd with obvious contempt. He walked like someone who owned everything he saw. "That is the groom?" whispered a Zypherian noble sitting next to Jake. "He looks like a warmonger." "This is a political marriage, then?" Jake asked quietly. "Of course. The Draxian kingdom has been pushing at our borders for years. This marriage is supposed to create peace between our peoples. But look at him. Does he look like someone who wants peace?" Jake had to agree. Prince Carvax looked like someone planning conquest, not celebrating a wedding. Then the music changed, becoming softer and more beautiful. Everyone in the hall stood as Princess Valera entered. Jake felt his heart skip a beat. The princess was stunning. She had the same silver skin as other Zephyrians, but hers seemed to glow with an inner light. Her hair flowed down her back like liquid moonlight, held in place by a crown of crystals that caught the light and threw rainbows across the hall. Her dress appeared to be made of woven starlight, similar to the walls around them. But what struck Jake most was the sadness in her eyes. Despite the smile on her face, despite the beauty of the moment, Greetings Valera looked like someone walking to their own execution rather than their wedding. She walked slowly down the aisle, her father, King Farron, beside her. The king was an imposing figure with silver hair and a face that showed both strength and wisdom. He looked proud of his daughter, but also troubled, as if he knew this wedding was wrong but could do nothing to stop it. When Valera reached the altar, Prince Carvax did not even look at her properly. He simply nodded once, as if she were a possession being delivered rather than his future wife. The ceremony began with the high priest, an ancient Zypherian in white robes, speaking about unity and partnership. The words were beautiful but felt hollow given the obvious mismatch between bride and groom. Princess Valera spoke her vows in a clear voice, but Jake could hear the pain hidden beneath the formal words. Then came the traditional question. If any here present knows of any reason why this union should not proceed, speak now or forever hold your peace. No one spoke. The silence stretched for a long moment. Jake found himself gripping the armrests of his seat, fighting the urge to stand up and object, even though he had no right and no reason beyond a gut feeling that this was wrong. Then the skylight shattered. Glass and crystal rained down as dark figures dropped into the hall on cables. They wore masks and carried weapons that hummed with energy. Assassins. Chaos erupted immediately. Nobles screamed and ran for the exits. Guards rushed forward but were cut down by precise weapons fire. The assassins moved with military precision, and Jake realized with horror that they were all converging on one target. Princess Valera. Jake did not think. Years of combat training took over. He drew his sidearm, a plasma pistol he had worn despite some protests from palace officials who thought weapons at a wedding were inappropriate. He vaulted over 2 rows of seats and sprinted toward the altar. 3 assassins were closing in on the princess. The royal guards were still trying to reach her, but they were too far away. Prince Carvax had already fled, pushing his bride aside in his panic to reach safety. The princess stood frozen, either from shock or courage, facing the attackers with her head held high. Jake fired twice, dropping the first 2 assassins before they knew he was there. The third spun toward him, raising a wicked-looking blade. Jake did not slow down. He crashed into the assassin like a missile, and both of them went tumbling across the altar platform, scattering ceremonial items in all directions. The fight was brutal and fast. The assassin was skilled, trained in combat techniques Jake had never seen before. But Jake had been fighting since he was 18 years old, in bars, in training rooms, and in real combat situations where hesitation meant death. He used every dirty trick he knew, fighting with the desperation of someone protecting an innocent person. Finally, Jake got his arm around the assassin's neck and squeezed until the figure went limp. He pushed the unconscious body away and looked up to find himself surrounded by royal guards with weapons pointed at him. "Stand down," commanded a voice full of authority. King Theron himself pushed through the guards. "This man just saved my daughter's life." Jake slowly stood up, breathing hard. His uniform was torn, and he was pretty sure he had a broken rib, but he was alive. He looked at Princess Valera, who was staring at him with wide eyes. "Are you all right, Your Highness?" Jake asked. "I am now," she said softly. "Thanks to you." The wedding hall had been cleared, and the remaining assassins captured or killed. Jake sat in a side chamber while a Zypherian medical officer examined his injuries. The broken rib turned out to be just badly bruised, and his other cuts and scrapes were minor. Still, everything hurt. King Theron entered the room followed by Princess Valera, who had changed out of her wedding dress into simpler robes. The king dismissed the medical officer with a wave of his hand and stood before Jake with an expression that was hard to read. "Captain Morrison," the king began, his voice formal but warm. "This is the second time you have saved members of my family. The debt I owe you grows beyond measure." Jake stood up, wincing slightly. "I was just doing what anyone would do, Your Majesty. I could not stand by and watch innocent people get hurt." "Most of my nobles ran for safety," the king said with a touch of bitterness. "My future son-in-law ran first of all, pushing my daughter aside to save himself. Yet you, a stranger to our world, risked your life without hesitation. That is not something anyone would do. That is something a true warrior does." Princess Valera stepped forward. Her face was pale but composed. "Captain Morrison, I owe you my life. How can I ever repay such a debt?" "No repayment needed, Your Highness. I am just glad you are safe." "Well, something must be done," the king said firmly. "But first, we have other urgent matters. Chancellor Pyrrhus, enter, please." The elderly chancellor came into the room carrying several data tablets. He looked shaken, but was trying to maintain his professional composure. "Your Majesty, the investigation has revealed disturbing facts. The assassins were hired by Prince Carvax himself." Princess Valera gasped. Jake felt anger rising in his chest but stayed silent. The chancellor continued. "He planned to have the princess killed during the ceremony and blame it on political rivals. According to the treaty, if the princess died before the marriage was completed, Carvax would still gain control of key Zypherian territories as compensation for the failed alliance. He would have gotten everything he wanted without actually having to marry." "That monster," Valera whispered. "He has been arrested," the king said, his voice cold with controlled fury. "The Draxian ambassador is already screaming about diplomatic immunity, but I do not care. Carvax will face justice for this attempted murder." "But this creates a new problem, Your Majesty," Chancellor Pyrrhus said carefully. "The treaty with the Draxian kingdom required a marriage alliance. Without it, they will claim we broke the agreement. They could use this as an excuse for war." "Then we find another match for my daughter," King Theron said firmly. "The Draxian court will reject anyone we propose," another advisor said, entering the room. "They will see it as an insult, a way to escape our obligations. Their pride will demand either the original marriage or war." Jake listened to the discussion escalate. Various nobles suggested different solutions, each one worse than the last. Some suggested giving the Draxians territory to appease them. Others wanted to prepare for war immediately. Princess Valera stood silently, her hands clasped tightly together, as everyone discussed her fate like she was a piece on a game board. Finally, she spoke up. "There is another solution." Everyone turned to look at her. She straightened her shoulders and looked directly at her father. "According to our ancient laws, when a warrior saves a royal family member's life during a formal ceremony, that warrior is elevated to noble status. Captain Morrison saved my life during my wedding ceremony. By law, he is now a noble of our realm." Jake felt a sinking feeling in his stomach as he realized where this was going. "Furthermore," Valera continued, her voice steady, "Captain Morrison has now saved my life twice. By our oldest traditions, this creates a life debt that can only be repaid through the highest honor our family can offer." She turned to Jake, her purple eyes meeting his. "I propose we offer Captain Morrison a marriage alliance. It would satisfy the treaty requirements while ensuring my future husband is a man of proven courage and honor." The room fell completely silent. Jake felt like all the air had been sucked out of the chamber. Everyone was staring at him now, waiting for his reaction. "Princess Valera," Jake said slowly, "I am honored beyond words, but I am just a fighter pilot. I do not know anything about being royalty or running an empire or any of this." He gestured around the palace. "You know about duty," King Theron said, studying Jake with those deep, penetrating eyes. "You know about protecting others. You know about doing what is right even when it is difficult. These are the qualities that matter most in a leader." "But a marriage," Jake protested, "that is not something that should be decided in a moment. That is a lifetime commitment." Princess Valera approached him, and Jake caught a faint scent, like jasmine mixed with something alien but pleasant. "Captain Morrison, I will be honest with you. I will not pretend this is a love match. I am asking for a partnership, an alliance between two people caught in difficult circumstances." She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. "If I do not marry you, my father will have to arrange another political marriage. It could be someone worse than Carvax. At least with you, I know I would be marrying a good man, someone who has already proven he will protect me." "What about what you want?" Jake asked quietly. "Do you not get a say in your own life?" Her laugh was bitter. "I am a princess. My life has never been my own. Every decision I make affects thousands of people. This is just another duty." Then her expression softened. "But if I must marry for duty, I would rather marry someone decent, someone I can trust." King Theron stepped closer to Jake. "I will not force this decision on you, Captain Morrison, but I will ask you to consider it carefully. This marriage would prevent a war that could cost millions of lives. It would create an alliance between Earth and the Zypherian Empire that could benefit both our peoples for generations. And it would give my daughter a chance at a life with someone who will treat her with respect." "How long do I have to decide?" Jake asked. "The Draxian court will demand an answer within 3 days, Chancellor Pyrrhus said. "They are already preparing their response to the broken engagement. We need to present them with an alternative quickly." 3 days to decide my entire future," Jake muttered. "I know it is not fair," Valera said softly. "I know we are asking you to give up everything you have known. But please, think about it." Jake looked at her, really looked at her. He saw intelligence in her eyes and strength and hope mixed with fear. She was trapped just as much as he would be if he agreed to this, maybe more so. "I will think about it," Jake promised. "I will give you an answer before the 3 days are up." King Theron nodded. "That is all we can ask. You may use the palace gardens if you need a quiet place to think. They have always brought me clarity in difficult times." As everyone filed out of the room, Princess Valera paused at the door. "Captain Morrison, whatever you decide, thank you for saving my life. I will never forget what you did today." Then she was gone, leaving Jake alone with the biggest decision he had ever faced in his life. Jake spent most of the next day walking through the palace gardens. The gardens were enormous, with sections that seemed to represent different planets and ecosystems. Some areas had plants that glowed softly in the shade. Others had flowers that sang in harmonies when the wind blew through them. It was beautiful, but also overwhelming. Casey Brooks managed to get through on a secure communication channel in the afternoon. Her face appeared on Jake's personal communication device, and she looked worried. "Jake, the news about the assassination attempt is all over the galactic networks. Are you okay?" "Physically, yes. Mentally, I am not so sure." Jake sat down on a bench made of living wood that seemed to grow into the perfect shape for sitting. "Casey, they want me to marry the princess." There was a long pause. "Say that again. I think I heard you wrong." "You heard me right. Princess Valera proposed a marriage alliance. It would prevent a war and satisfy the treaty with the Draxian kingdom." Casey stared at him through the screen. "Jake, that is insane. You cannot just marry an alien princess because of politics." "People have gotten married for worse reasons," Jake said, though he did not sound convinced. "At least she seems like a good person. Smart, brave, honest about what this would be. But do you want to marry her? Do you want to give up your career, your life, everything you know? That was the question Jake had been asking himself all day. I do not know. Part of me says this is crazy and I should get on the next transport back to Earth. But another part keeps thinking about what King Theron said. This marriage could prevent a war. How many lives would that save? You cannot sacrifice your entire life just to be a hero, Jake. Maybe not. But what kind of life do I have to sacrifice? I fly patrol missions in empty space. I have no family waiting for me back on Earth. No real friends except you and the squadron. What am I really giving up? Casey was quiet for a moment. You are really considering this. I think I am, Jake admitted. Is that crazy? Maybe, but I have known you for 5 years, Jake. You have always been the guy who runs toward danger to help others. Maybe this is just a bigger version of that. After the call ended, Jake continued his walk. He found himself in a wilder section of the garden where the plants grew more naturally. It reminded him a bit of the forests back on Earth, though the colors were all wrong, and some of the trees had leaves that moved on their own. I thought I might find you here, said a voice behind him. Jake turned to find Princess Valera approaching. She wore simple clothing now, nothing like the elaborate gowns she had worn before. She looked younger this way, more approachable. Your Highness, I did not expect to see you. Please, call me Valera. If we are going to possibly marry, we should at least use first names. She sat down on a fallen log and Jake sat beside her. I wanted to apologize. For what? For putting you in this position. It is not fair to you. You came here as a guest and now we are asking you to change your entire life. Jake picked up a stone and tossed it gently between his hands. You are in the same position, though. Your whole life has been decided by other people. True, but I was born into this. I have never known anything different. You have a choice. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the strange sounds of the alien forest around them. Finally, Jake spoke. Can I ask you something? What do you actually want? If you could choose anything, what would you pick? Valera thought about it for a long time. I would want to matter. Not just as a princess, not just as a treaty agreement, but as a person who makes a real difference. I would want to help people, to use my position for good instead of just being a symbol. She looked at Jake. What about you? What do you want? Honestly, I have been asking myself that same question. I joined the military because I wanted to protect people. I wanted to do something that mattered. Flying patrol missions is important, but it feels like I am just waiting for something real to happen. He tossed the stone away. Maybe this is something real. You are thinking of accepting, Valera said. It was not a question. I am thinking about it, but I need to know something first. If I do this, if I agree to marry you, what would our life actually be like? Would I just be some decoration? A human pet for the royal family? Valera actually laughed at that. No, my father is serious about making you the royal ambassador of human affairs. Earth and the Zypherian Empire have had limited contact until now. You would be building something new, creating bridges between our peoples. It would be real work with real consequences. And between us? Jake asked carefully. What would that be like? Honest, Valera said immediately. I will not lie to you or pretend feelings I do not have. I will not ask you to love me or pretend to love me. But I will promise to respect you, to be a true partner in all things, and to give us a real chance to build something good together. Jake looked at her, studying her face in the strange light filtering through the alien trees. Your father mentioned something about love being a garden that grows with care and respect. It is an old saying among my people. Love is not something that just happens. It is something you build day by day through kindness and trust and shared experiences. She met his eyes. I am not asking you to love me now, Jake. I am asking if you would be willing to try growing that garden with me. That is a much better way to put it, Jake admitted. They talked for hours after that. Valera told him about her childhood in the palace, about the pressure of being the only child of the king, about her dreams and fears. Jake told her about Earth, about growing up in a small town and always wanting to fly, about the loneliness of space and the rush of combat. As the alien sun began to set, painting the sky in colors Earth never saw, Jake realized something important. He liked Valera. She was intelligent and funny when she let her guard down. She understood duty and sacrifice, but still had hope for something better. They were not in love, but they could be friends. And maybe friendship was a better foundation for marriage than the passionate romance stories always talked about. "I need to speak with your father," Jake said as they walked back toward the palace. "You have made your decision?" "I think so, but I need to make sure I understand exactly what I am agreeing to before I give my final answer." That evening, Jake met with King Theron in a private study. The room was smaller than Jake expected, lined with books and data tablets from countless worlds. The king poured them both a drink from a crystal decanter. The liquid inside glowed faintly blue. "Traditional Zephyrian wine," the king explained, "made from fruits that only grow in the high mountains. I thought we could speak informally, just two men discussing the future." Jake took a sip. The wine tasted like starlight might taste if starlight had flavor. "Your Majesty, if I agree to marry Valera, I need to know I will not lose who I am. I am human. That will never change." "I would never ask you to change that," King Theron said seriously. "The Zephyrian Empire has survived for 10,000 years because we learn from others. We adapt and grow. You would bring something we desperately need, a fresh perspective from a species we have barely begun to understand." "And the Earth Defense Force? My career? We would arrange an honorable discharge with full commendations, though I suspect your military commanders would be quite happy to have one of their officers in such a position. The diplomatic advantages for Earth would be considerable." Jake nodded slowly. That made sense from a political standpoint. "One more question. What happens if Valera and I try this and it does not work? What if we cannot build that garden she talked about?" The king's expression grew sad. "Then you would still be bound by duty to fulfill your role as prince and ambassador. But I would hope you and my daughter could at least be friends and partners, even if deeper feelings do not develop. Marriage without love is difficult, but marriage with mutual respect and shared purpose can still be a good life." Jake finished his wine and set down the glass. "Then I have my answer, Your Majesty. I will marry Princess Valera." The announcement was made the next morning before the full royal court. Jake stood beside Princess Valera as King Theron proclaimed their engagement to a room full of shocked nobles. The Zephyrian aristocrats whispered among themselves, clearly surprised that their princess would marry a human. But no one dared object openly when the king made it clear this was his decision. The Draxian ambassador was furious, but could not argue with the logic. The treaty had required a marriage alliance, and technically this satisfied that requirement. Prince Carvax would face trial for attempted murder, and the Draxian kingdom would have to accept the new arrangement or risk looking even more foolish than they already did. The wedding was scheduled for 1 week later. Jake spent that week in intense training, learning everything he could about Zephyrian royal protocol. His instructors were patient but thorough, drilling him on proper forms of address, ceremonial procedures, and the complex social rules that governed palace life. "You must bow exactly 45 degrees when greeting a foreign ambassador," explained his etiquette instructor, a stern Zephyrian woman named Lady Mira. 30 degrees for a noble of equal rank, 60 degrees for visiting royalty. "What if I just shake everyone's hand?" Jake suggested. Lady Mira looked horrified. "Absolutely not. Physical contact is reserved for close friends and family only." Jake sighed. This was going to be harder than flying a fighter through an asteroid field. His old squadron arrived 3 days before the wedding. Case Brooks found him in the training room, where he was practicing the traditional wedding dance steps. She watched him stumble through the complex movements and started laughing. "Oh, this is priceless. The great Captain Morrison defeated by dance steps. Shut up, Jake said, but he was grinning. These moves are impossible. My feet are not designed to do whatever this is supposed to be. Casey sat down on a bench. So you are really doing this, getting married to an alien princess? Looks that way. Are you scared? Jake stopped dancing and sat down beside her. Terrified. But also, I do not know, maybe excited? Valera is a good person, Casey. We have been spending time together this week and I actually like her. We are becoming friends. Friends is a good start for a marriage, Casey said. Better than some human marriages I have seen. The other members of Jake's squadron were equally supportive. Lieutenant Ryan Cooper, Jake's longtime wingman, clapped him on the shoulder. Never thought I would see you settle down. Figured you would die old and alone in a cockpit somewhere. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Jake said dryly. But seriously, Jake, we are happy for you. Princess Valera seems great. And you are going to be a prince. That is pretty amazing. The night before the wedding, Jake could not sleep. He stood on the balcony of his quarters, looking out at the glowing city below. Tomorrow his entire life would change. There would be no going back. Could not sleep either? Asked a voice. Jake turned to find Valera on the balcony next to his. Their quarters were connected by a shared terrace that he had not noticed before. She wore simple sleeping robes, and her silver hair hung loose around her shoulders. Too much on my mind, Jake admitted. Valera came over to his side of the terrace. Are you having second thoughts? Maybe third or fourth thoughts by now, Jake said with a weak smile. But I am not backing out. I gave my word. You can still change your mind. I would not blame you. Jake looked at her. In the soft glow of the city lights, she looked almost human. Do you want me to change my mind? No, Valera said quietly. I know this sounds strange, but I am actually looking forward to marrying you. These past few days, talking with you, getting to know you, it has been the happiest I have been in years. You treat me like a person, not a princess. You are a person. That is what matters. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the city. Finally, Valera spoke again. Jake, I want you to know something. I am going to do everything I can to make this work, to be a good wife and partner to you. You are giving up so much for me, for my people. I will not let that sacrifice be for nothing. We are in this together, Jake said. Both of us trying to make the best of a complicated situation. That is all anyone can do. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather. The ceremony was held in the same grand hall of eternal light, now fully repaired from the assassination attempt. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. There was joy in the air, real happiness instead of the forced formality of the previous ceremony. Jake stood at the altar in traditional Zephyrian ceremonial robes. The fabric was lighter than it looked and actually quite comfortable. His squadron stood as his honor guard, looking proud in their Earth Defense Force dress uniforms. The sight of them gave Jake strength. When Valera entered the hall, Jake felt his breath catch just like the first time he had seen her. But now it was different. Now he knew the person behind the beauty. He knew her intelligence, her sense of humor, her hopes and fears. And that made her even more beautiful. She walked down the aisle with her father, and when she reached the altar, King Theron placed her hand in Jake's. The king's expression was warm and approving. The ceremony blended Zephyrian and human traditions. They exchanged vows in both languages, promising partnership, respect, and protection. When the priest declared them married, Jake kissed Valera gently. It was their first kiss, and it felt right. Not passionate or overwhelming, just right. The reception was magnificent. Guests from dozens of worlds celebrated the union. Ambassador Helena Wright from Earth made a point of congratulating Jake personally. You have done a great service for humanity, Jake. This alliance will open doors that have been closed for generations. I just hope I can live up to expectations, Jake said. You already have, just by being yourself. As the evening went on, Jake found himself actually enjoying the party. The Zephyrian nobles who had been suspicious of him at first were warming up, especially after a few drinks. His squadron told embarrassing stories about his early days as a pilot, which made Valera laugh. "Is it true you once flew your fighter through a space station because you were too stubborn to go around?" she asked. "It was a shortcut," Jake protested, "and I did not hit anything important." "You hit the station commander's personal shuttle," Ryan said, laughing. Late in the evening, Jake and Valera finally had a moment alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The party continued inside, but out here it was quiet and peaceful. "How are you feeling?" Valera asked, taking his hand. "Like my life just completely changed," Jake said. "But in a good way, I think." "I feel the same." She leaned against his shoulder. "Thank you, Jake, for giving us a chance." "Thank you for seeing something in me worth taking a chance on." They stood together, husband and wife, human and Zephyrian, looking out at a future neither of them could have imagined a month ago. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Jake would have to learn how to be a prince, how to navigate palace politics, how to be a bridge between two very different worlds. But tonight, standing with Valera under alien stars, Jake felt something he had not felt in years. He felt like he belonged somewhere. He felt like he had found a home. The next day brought official ceremonies. King Theron held a formal event in the throne room, attended by nobles, military officials, and representatives from countless worlds. Jake stood before the throne, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes on him. "Prince Jake Morrison," the king's voice rang out through the great hall, "you have married my daughter and become part of the royal family. But a prince requires more than a title. Today I grant you the coronet of unity, a symbol worn by those who bridge different peoples and cultures." A silver circlet was brought forward, engraved with symbols from both Earth and Zephyria. As King Theron placed it on Jake's head, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers. Jake felt the weight of it, both physical and symbolic. "Furthermore," the king continued, "I appoint you as Royal Ambassador of Human Affairs. You will work to foster understanding between our peoples and ensure humanity's voice is heard in our councils." Jake bowed. "I accept this honor and responsibility, Your Majesty. I will serve to the best of my ability." As Jake left the throne room with his new title and responsibilities, Valera walked beside him. She slipped her hand into his and squeezed gently. "Ready to start our new life?" she asked. Jake squeezed back. "Ready as I will ever be." Together they walked forward into their future, a human fighter pilot who had stumbled into a wedding and the alien princess who had seen potential in him that he had not seen in himself. Their story was just beginning, and the galaxy was watching to see what this unlikely pair would accomplish together.